Oh, hello! My name is Mara, and welcome to Books Like Whoa. Guys, we've made it! It's been a long journey of listicles and best and worst of the year and all that good stuff, but we're finally here. This is my top 10-ish, with a couple of caveats, books of the year. And I am so excited because it was really hard for me to come up with this list because I had an excellent year of reading. Now, when we get to my overall stats, I think next week, you'll see that in terms of year over year, it looks almost on paper like it was a worse reading year, but I got through a lot more books. And I think my highs this year were even higher than last year. So it was just like a really solid year of reading. Very hard to come up with this list because of that, which is part of why I did my best ofs by genre, because I wanted to make sure that I shouted out some really good books that didn't quite make this cut, but that were definitely worth talking about. I should also mention that the lowest rating any of these books has is a 4.5 star, and a 4.5 star to me is a best of the year. A 5 star is an all-time favorite. So the first few on this list are 4.5, and I'll let you know when we move into the 5 star. I'm so excited to geek out about all of my favorite books for the year, so let's do this. Let's talk about my top 10-ish books of 2018. Number 10 is Dredd Nation by Justina Ireland. I'm gonna say this was my favorite YA fantasy type book, or like non-contemporary book that I read this year. I talk about this in my best of SFF list, so I won't go too far into this. I'll just say that I think part of what I love about this, I love the world building, I really like the characters, I'm really excited about the plot, all of that. But in particular, I love the thematic content of this. And I think this, along with the one other YA book that's on this list, are just like excellent representations of what YA that is actually for young adults and not like adult readers like me who are increasingly who these books are marketed towards. But anyway, in terms of serving the actual intended audience, I think this book is a phenomenal representation of how to take complex thematic ideas and put that on the text of the book to help young and developing readers learn how to read for that. And in this case, this is a book that thematically is about respectability politics and the whole concept of passing. So I think the metaphor that this, fantastical universe allows Justina Ireland to sort of weave for young adults is just really, it's a complicated idea that is approachable for its audience. I really appreciate the respect for the audience, like the intended audience that Ireland shows in the way that she puts this together. I think it's really well written. I think it has some really fun subversions of where you think some of the character pieces might go, and I don't want to get into that because I don't want to spoil anything, but anyway, all that to say, my favorite non-contemporary YA pick of the year, and something that I really enjoyed and am really looking forward to the subsequent books. Number 9 is my nonfiction duo that I had in that list of White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo and So You Want to Talk About Race by Ijouma Oluo. That combo, I think, is the best, kind of general nonfiction with, practicable advice that I read this year, in terms of it's nonfiction that is specifically informative and specifically exhorting you to do something. I think that combo together is just really powerful. I talked about that in my nonfiction wrap up, so I won't go a whole lot further, but I just think that both of those are really easy to recommend for people who are looking to kind of engage in those conversations. So those together, I think, pack a real 1-2 punch, and it's a little bit of a cheat, I know, but I think of those together because I read them almost at the same time, and I just think that they're a really good pairing. Okay, and then my last 4.5 pick, and so therefore my favorite of my 4.5 picks, is Iron and Magic by Ilona Andrews. This is definitely very idiosyncratic to my taste because Ilona Andrews is probably my favorite writing pair that is working today. I love all the series from them that I've read. They really know how to end a series well. See the Innkeeper Chronicle first little arc, the first little arc of the Hidden Legacy series, and the end of the Kate Daniels series, which we got this year. But I liked Iron and Magic, which is the beginning of a spin-off series from the Kate Daniels verse, even better than I liked the last Kate Daniels book. I gave this a 4.5 star. I love that we have a trilogy following one of the main villains from Kate Daniels, and I'm really excited to see where it goes. And I think they did a good job of sort of justifying why this trilogy is happening in this first book. There's a lot of things that I want to find out, and a lot of sort of mysteries to unfold. So yeah, I'm really excited to see where that trilogy goes, and I thought this was a great kickoff to that trilogy. Really enjoyed my time in a different part of the Kate Daniels world, and it makes me very hopeful for more spinoff series that I think are coming. So that was my favorite fantasy, kind of just general fantasy book of the year. And then moving into my favorite memoir / essay collection of the year, and this is the first 5-star, so we're in 5-star territory from here on out, was Eloquent Rage by Brittney Cooper. Again, I talked about this in my nonfiction wrap-up, so I won't say a lot. I'll just say that this really hit the sweet spot for me in terms of really thought-provoking essays about intersectional feminism, which is something I'm very interested in. A great authorial voice. Like for a memoir, you want to like the author's voice and kind of like how they're relating their story, which I definitely did. And just, I think, really timely and explains very complicated ideas in a way that really, I think, can connect for readers. So I absolutely love this. Really recommend. I've given this as a gift to people. Really love this memoir essay collection. Okay, moving into my favorite just sort of general fiction novel of the year. And I really had a hard time going back and forth between this and the number 5 pick, but I ultimately put this at number 6, is How to Be Safe by Tom McAllister. Now, I haven't talked about this yet in any of my wrap-up videos because I decided I didn't read quite enough just sort of general fiction that I couldn't slot into a genre to merit a full video unto itself. So I'll just say that I have a whole review of this, so you can go see my full sort of like discussion about it. But for me, this was just a really potent blend of dark humor and thematically something that I found really compelling. And the writing is very clear, and in its clarity, it's able to be beautiful, if that makes sense. Thematically, this is essentially about the relationship between gun violence and misogyny. The setup is that a teacher who just got suspended, there's a mass shooting at the school she was working at the next day, so she comes under investigation. She's quickly cleared, but that essentially sends her life into kind of a spiral. So this is, literary fiction. It's pretty short, and I think it's really just very powerful, at least to me. I started off giving this a 4.5, but as I thought about it more and more, I realized it was a 5-star because this is one of my favorite literary fiction books I've ever read, like a contemporary, like one that was released recently. The humor in this, I think, is a huge piece of it. So if you don't like the humor, you're not going to like this book. But for me, it really worked. I listened to the author's podcast, which is called Book Fight, and I really enjoy it. So that may have kind of primed the pump for me in terms of being down for that humor. So, caveat there. But I really enjoyed this. I mean, I'm putting it at number 6. I think it's just really, really good. I wish this was a book more people read. I think that this handles an unlikable protagonist really well. Yeah, just all around, like I said, my favorite just sort of general novel that I read this year, and one that I would definitely recommend. And, thematically and plot-wise very timely, which moves us well into my number 5 pick, because the reason these were sort of duking it out, and I almost put them as a pair, is that they are very similar books in a lot of ways. So moving into number 5, and that is A Heart in a Body in the World by Deb Caletti. This is my favorite YA book of the year. Oh my gosh, guys. Okay, so little backstory here. I had heard a few recommendations for this, most notably from Emily at Possibly Literate. When she was talking about this book, I was like, oh, that sounds like something I would really like. And I do my cutoff for my end of the year on the 15th of December. So peek behind the curtain, today is the 16th when I'm filming. And I suspected that, thematically this sounds like it would be a really good book. I should read this just in case it might make a list of some kind. I want to see if I can sneak it in before the 15th. It's YA, I can get through it pretty fast. I should definitely see if I can go ahead and get to this. So I read this yesterday, literally on the last day of what my cutoff for the end of the year is. And guys, this book destroyed me. I'm going to try not to cry while I talk about this, but and I'm still processing it, so we'll see ultimately what I end up saying about it. But this book is the book I would want to give to specifically any young girl, but just any woman who has experienced any kind of violence because of their gender. This book is so moving. It is so powerful. It is basically, and I don't want to, it's a character-driven book, so I don't think it doesn't have spoilers necessarily, but I don't want to get too into the details because there is sort of an unraveling of something that I think you'll suspect pretty early on what's happened. But basically, this is very thematically similar to the last book I talked about, How to Be Safe, in terms of the kind of relationship between violence and misogyny, and this young girl who is trying to move on from something, and so she just starts running and just keeps running across the country, kind of like Forrest Gump style. And her granddad ends up following her in his RV, and it's about her making peace with, and I'm starting to cry, and finding strength in what has happened to her and refinding her voice. And this book is just, like, it just really hit me in the feels. And it's something that I knew I was gonna like it, but I was so surprised at how much I love this. This is one of the most thematically complicated and well rendered YA novels I've ever read. I love the kind of intertextuality it has. A book called Endurance. I love the love interest pieces of this are very purposeful, and I think really add to the themes of the story and the journey that the main character is on. I love the family pieces of this. I love that Deb Caletti had enough confidence that she didn't feel the need to heap like a ton of other side, like angsty things into this, which is something I think happens a lot in this kind of YA, is that it gets very maudlin and very angsty and very unrealistic really quickly. It's like the main character is already dealing with like a huge thing, and you don't need to heap a ton of other conflicts onto that. And I appreciated that restraint. I loved like the reflective passages of this, like where the heroine is running and thinking about like kind of the reasons why she's running. Oh, like I'm sorry, I keep crying because I just love this book so much. And like I said, this is a book that I would love to give really to any woman who has experienced violence because of their gender, but particularly to like the YA piece of this, I think works really well. And see if I can say this without crying. I love that the message of this is that the response to that is not to be silent, but to find your voice again. And I just... as you can see, this book gave me all the feels. So hopefully by the time I talk about this in my December wrap up, I will be able to talk about it without crying, but like it is still very raw and I still cannot do that quite yet. But this book I absolutely loved and is something, I mean, it's an all-time favorite. Like I will certainly reread this again, and I just very impressed by it. Whew, okay. Hard pivot away from like super emotional YA contemporary to my favorite speculative fiction, like my overall favorite SFF type title of the year that also has a lot of violence in it, but is dealt with in a very different tone and fashion. And that is The Library at Mount Char by Scott Hawkins. This book, I started out with having this as a 4.5, but as like I have sat with it more and more, I realized it's a 5-star. This is a book that I definitely would point to as a taste defining book for me in terms of like, if I were describing some of the things that I really like in fiction, definitely be a candidate of like, if you read this, you will know a lot about what I like as a reader in terms of I love things that play with the genre in an interesting way. And this is definitely that. I mean, speculative fiction is sort of where I've ended up with it, but like, it's kind of post-apocalyptic, it's kind of horror, it's kind of fantasy, it's kind of sci-fi. Like, depending on how you read this, it could be any of those things. And it is very violent. It is very intense in a lot of ways, but I absolutely love this. It's a book that if like, you know, maybe do a little reading to find content warnings, but like if you can handle the subject matter, I would recommend this to pretty much anyone, because even if you hate it, I think you'll have like a strong response in some way to it. Like I don't think I've seen a lot of people who are just sort of like, meh, this is meh. Like I think mostly people are like, I really like it, or I get why people like this, but this is just not working for me or whatever. Like it's a really interesting book. And I always refer to the Poptimist review of it because he is much more articulate about this particular book than I've been able to be. But yeah, I definitely decided to bump this up to a 5-star, and I think it well deserves to be number 4 because it's one that's really stuck with me. I've been recommending it a lot, and it's one that I think I will continue to think about for a long time. Okay, number 3 is my favorite mystery of the year, and considering I read a lot of mystery, thriller, whatever, that's saying something, and that is The Broken Girls by Simone St. James. Another 5-star that started off as a 4.5 because as I thought about it, I realized like, yeah, I love this book. It's an all-time fave. And it's one I've recommended a lot this year, so I feel like it definitely deserves to be high up. Yeah, this just has a lot of things that work for me in it. I think it does the thing that genre fiction can do, which is take metaphor and build it out in an interesting way that sort of comes at that metaphor from a different angle than kind of straightforward literary fiction does. So, you know, it's in the title, The Broken Girls, and it's basically exploring in 3 different kind of timelines what it might mean to be a broken girl. girl and how our society deals with broken girls. And I don't always love a dual, or even in this case, a tri timeline. But I think that the author handles that really nicely, and it didn't feel, I was equally interested in every timeline, if that makes sense. And to me, that's often the problem with the dual timeline, is that I'm really into one and am impatient with the other. I was really into, the two big ones a lot, and then the third one was also interesting to me. I really like how this plays with elements of the supernatural in a fun way, in a way that sort of keeps you guessing a little bit as to whether or not it's really there. I really liked the kind of contemporary thriller piece of it, which is not always my favorite, but I think that she plays with some of our expectations, particularly around love interests for dark detective type people in a contemporary thriller, in an interesting way. Yeah, I just all around really love this and would highly recommend. Number 2 is my favorite nonfiction pick of the year. And again, I talked about this at length in my nonfiction wrap up, so I will mostly refer you to that, but it is, unsurprisingly, Stamped from the Beginning by Ibram X. Kendi. This is probably the book I've recommended the most this year to people, because it is the rare book that I would feel comfortable recommending to pretty much any reader. I think anyone could benefit from reading this intellectual history of racist ideas against Black people in America. Exceptionally well done nonfiction. And I love intellectual history, so that's a piece of it. I've been really interested in that type of intellectual history this year, so I'm sure that's also a piece of it. But yeah, this is just a super well done book that I highly recommend. I also think it works really well as audio, if that is something that you're interested in particular. But yeah, excellent, well deserving of number 2, but couldn't quite edge out number 1, which again, I think if you watch this channel won't be entirely a surprise. But we've almost arrived to that one. I do have one little subcategory I want to shout out before we get to it though. So before we get to the full number 1 book, I do just want to shout out my favorite reread of the year. Now, I do reread a lot every year. This year in particular, I was doing a Project Poirot thing, so I was rereading a bunch of Poirot books, and then I also did a reread of the entire Kate Daniels verse, so yes, I do a lot of rereading every year, but this year for book club, I reread The Haunting of Hill House. And the reason I wanted to shout it out as my favorite reread is that it is the one where the reread very much enhanced my enjoyment of this, in terms of it was a 4-star book, and then after I reread it, it became a 5-star, just because the first time I read The Haunting of Hill House, I read it purely as a horror type novel and really enjoyed it as that. This time though, and I think maybe just because of where I was at in my life, my father had just passed and I was kind of in that space, I read this as a novel of an intense existential despair occasioned by the loss of a parent with whom the protagonist had a very complicated relationship. So I was reading it purely without supernatural elements, and it works just as well that way. And I think that's a real hallmark of great horror, is that sort of line between is there something supernatural happening or not is really well handled in this book. And it's a pretty short novel, but it just packs a real wallop, I think. And yeah, I would really recommend it. I know a lot of people were rereading this year because of the Netflix adaptation that came out. I haven't been able to get through that adaptation because it is so unlike the book, and I just reread it that that didn't quite work for me. I'm going to try again next Halloween. But anyway, if you've been seeing a lot of people talking about this and wondering if it's worth giving a read, I say 100%. I really enjoyed my reread of this year. And now it is time for my favorite book of the year. This is utterly unsurprising because I've talked about this book a lot. And I also enjoy the fact that the same author is at the top of my best of list for 2017 and for 2018. For 2017, it was for probably my all-time favorite memoir, which was Hunger. And this year, it is for a re-released short story collection called Ayiti by Roxane Gay. Note the gorgeous cover. I read this by accident, basically. So I was trying to get an arc of Not That Bad by Roxane Gay, so I typed in her name into NetGalley and saw that this came up, and I was like, oh, I didn't know this was happening. And this is a re-release of a short story collection that Grove put out this year, of a short story collection that she published, I think, originally in 2011. And I adore adored this. This was so good. It works so well as a collection. I think that's what I like most about it. So it's called Ayiti, and that is, I believe, like a native, like an indigenous word for Haiti. And all of these are thematically related to Haiti in some way. I think that this book does a great job of pacing, like in terms of shorter versus longer stories. All of them really are thematically in some way connected to Haiti in so many different ways in terms of like the history of Haiti, gender relations in Haiti, colonialist issues of Haiti, economics, religion, and like indigenous religion versus like inherited religion from colonizers, and just like so many different angles. I really love that piece of it. I think that this handles sexuality both in the context of like enjoyment of sexuality and also like sexual violence in a way that is some of the best I've ever seen. I just think that Roxane Gay writes about that subject matter in a way that other writers really could look to in terms of how to write sex scenes that are actually interesting in terms of character development and in terms of saying something. So I think that she has some of the best sex scenes I've ever written. When she addresses sexual violence, I felt like it was in a way that has like a deep understanding of what sexual violence is really about, which is power. So I appreciated that. It has a long short story version of what I think became a novel from her called An Untamed State. And I've always known that I don't think I could do a whole novel of that. So I was really excited to see a short story version because I could like deal with the content of that in a short story context. Yeah, I just absolutely love this, and I think I have a review of that. I'll link that somewhere, but this became my favorite book of the year when I read it back in spring, and it has stayed that way. I just think that this is fantastic. I'm a sucker for short stories, so that's probably a part of this, is that I just really like short story collections. But yeah, Roxane Gay is just like one of my favorite authors is what it boils down to. And I've been saving Difficult Women, which is her other short story collection, for next year, because I kind of, in my heart, I'm like, I would love it if I had 3 years in a row where Roxane Gay topped my list. So next year, stay tuned. Maybe Difficult Women will become my favorite book of that year. But yeah, absolutely love this. So highly recommend. And it was definitely my favorite book of 2018. So that does it for my best of 2018. And we're like rounding the bend on my listicles for 2018. On Wednesday, you will see my most surprising books of 2018. But I believe the day you're seeing this is New Year's Eve. So happy New Year's Eve. I hope you have safe plans, fun plans for this evening. And yeah, New Year is always a time, I think, that gives us reflection. And 2018 was a real year of highs and lows for me. But I think ultimately, I don't know, I was kind of reflecting on this the other day with one of my friends of like, I feel like 2018 was a year of me really like coming into myself as like a woman and an adult and a person. So I feel like for the lows, and there definitely were those, I feel like I'm coming out stronger. And I definitely, in terms of the reading side of things and the booktube side of things, this has been an amazing year. I've had so much fun on here, and yeah, this is just such a fun hobby for me. And I really enjoy interacting with you all. I'm such a book nerd, and I love that I get the chance to talk to other book nerds that I may never get to meet in real life, but who share the passion. And it's just been so fun to kind of curate a space for other people who have maybe similar taste to me, or at least a similar approach to reading that I do. So anyway, all that to say, happy 2018. Good luck going into 2019. And if you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, follow me on the social medias if you are so inclined. I have all that information listed in the description box below. And I think that will do it. Have a great New Year's Eve. Have a great day, and I will just talk to you soon. Bye.